It's Larry and Buck.
Okay. Buck is for short for David H. Peterson. And I'm Larry. And this year I'll try and keep this up here by my mouth. And point with this instead of this. Are we all set?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. What David and I are doing here today, and what I am going to do first is kind of lay the groundwork in pounding copper to get a result, whatever it is. And we're talking about this Bannerstone, but it's a bigger overview than that. And right here, the man that made the reproduction, Joe Neubauer, and he's sitting there with a little Mishi Pishu by him. Followed us all around, always following us around. Up above there was his stamp that he and I stamp on all our stuff, so at least somebody will see it someday and won't think it was a real old copper piece. Next one. And the other part of our deal is, well, I'll just follow the cards here and not ad-lib it here. Today's objectives. Present present the native copper anneal pound 12 sequences and present the Neubauer's, Dave's Neubauer's manufacturing technique that he wrote up years ago and really never got to put out. And this is going to be kind of a little bit of a publication for that. And honoring him, Joe. And honoring my brother David, who isn't here this year. Passed on last year. So him and Joe are out in the bush right now, and we're indoors. And that was Joe's, if you can go back one, care, share, and compare in all things, you know, whether it was gardening or if it was copper or anything. So, and we try and remember that. What David and I did last year, or I'll just say Buck, was we decided to write up a little thing on copper manufacturing. And what we did was we went and just grabbed 8-10 pieces of nuggets, and we took them down to my house and picked out 4 of them. Well, we picked out 2, and then I said, let's do 4. We picked out 4. We have no idea. They've been sitting in the ground gaining crud and deteriorating forever, and we don't know what's inside. Well, we started with them, we ended up with them, and they're right here. So our objective was to replicate ancient technology that creates archaic tools and ornaments. Next. The following slides demonstrate the anneal pound cycle from native copper float into an archaic rat tail spear point and bead. That was really the first one we did. It's marked a little different as 3, but here you can see we took the nugget, we put it in the fire, got it up over 500 degrees to annealing temperature and scoured it. That's one of Don Spahn's favorite words, and it works well. We scoured it. We cleaned, initially got the cleaning off. We started, pardon? Oh. We scoured it, And that means knocking out the matrix and the crud that's on it. So there's the result. Next one. We're back here. This is the one we're going to talk about. There's that piece of float. Next.
It was from Ken Flood.
That one was?
Yeah.
Okay.
If anybody wants.
Into the fire, annealing, softens, realigns the atoms, and makes these pieces of copper, especially when they look like this now, poundable. Next. After the first anneal, where we scoured it, you can see a lot of the crud is leaving it. Now we're going to start pounding on it, and that'll take it further. Next. We're starting to form a bar, and we're discovering all kinds of terrible problems. This big crack right down through here. Some other works, but we're looking for whatever happens at the end. We don't care if we're a failure or if we make something that can take down an animal. Next. We used right here, this is the one we used, the stone hammer. There I'm shaping a piece of copper around a piece of hardwood, which is birch. But just to show you what the tool, and this tool is my favorite because it's got one flat end, it's got one round end. You can use it two different ways there. Next.
Was that an ancient tool, or
No, that we came from on the North Shore, Lake Superior, up the shore by Knife River and out of Duluth, and that came from down Stony Point. Actually, my wife found that one and put it in her garden, and I have it. But I get a lot of my stones and pieces of basalt down there in Stony Point.
A question on the annealing. At 500 degrees, you can get that with charcoal without any problem?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. It's very easy.
You're talking Fahrenheit, I guess.
Yeah. Now, I'll get them a lot higher than that. I'll get them to melting or making them bubble. So you can, with just a little draft, you can obtain that. Okay, now we're starting to pound that choice piece we have, and we're finding out it's not so choice. Next one. That's down on Stony Point, just to point out cutting. A lot of the copper, when you get a lot of flaws, say on the end of this piece here, there's a flaw developing, and I'm going to have to cut it off because this is going to be made even larger. You just, that's a piece of basalt, broken basalt there. See the sharp edges? All you do is put your copper on that sharp edge and hammer it. And turn it over, do it the other side. You can flick it right off. So, okay. I didn't have to do that to this one. It did it itself. Next one. Fine, I just pulled it. Now I've got two pieces out of what's happening to my rat tail spear, which I wanted about this long. Now I'm losing Now what we can do is we can make something else completely out of the other one. That seems pretty solid now. The other end, we can make something. So I says, well, let's just make a little ring or a bead type thing. Next. So now I'm starting to extend that rod out a little bit. It's starting to develop more cracks in it, that little extra piece. Next one.
Every time you're heating it, you're pounding it. You're heating it, you're pounding it.
And I'm abrading it. I should have brought that up in the beginning. That takes all the little edges off that you don't want to pound back into it, that cause those that looks like it's being layered. Those are the flaws, and the more you can get those out, the better. And sandstone. That's from Bob Wheeler's. No, this one's from over by Cornucopia on the South Shore. Stuff is some of this Jacobsville sandstone from like Bob Wheeler's. He's about the top of the sandstone there. It's a finer grain, and it's nice to work with. This stuff from a little further, the brownstone over further east by Duluth, and that is a little coarser. Just like your different grades of sandpaper or anything. Okay, we're showing up more flaws in that little piece. The other one's looking good. This is just a flat flaw right here, but then it kind of dives right in. So we're going to see where it goes. Next one. Now I pounded it to the point where it's starting to look bad. And we're still okay on the rat tail, except for this fly here, but it doesn't go all the way through. And what the ancients were doing, they were always compacting those flaws and making the unit, the implement, mechanically strong. And when we find them nowadays, those are the places that are often the parts that are the deteriorated most. Next one. Now our little ring, our bead, is going south real fast. Well, we're not going to give up. And we're extending the length. Now, David kept explicit measurements, weights, and records on this whole sequence for the 4 pieces we made. And I know he took over 1,000 pictures. So you're just seeing a moment in time, really.
You have that full slideshow here if anybody wants to see
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I have that full slideshow here. If you want to watch it, we can stick it in on a break or a... But, so, we're getting worried, and we're making 3 other ones at the same time. And we're running into problems with them too. Next, okay, now look what's happening. That one's looking pretty good on that side, but the other side, and it's almost layered. But this is, I'm working hard to save that so I don't have to make just a little itty bitty rat tail spear. And if I can push this one in, we'll see. So let's go to the next one. Well, okay, that's that ring. You're not going to get married with that or propose with that one.
You show the flakes that you have to braid off.
Oh, yeah. When I was talking about braiding, these things come off when you braid. A lot of them you can flick off with your fingernail. But mainly the abrading is done along these edges, and it takes care of all those problems. Next. Now it's beyond the preform shape. She's going for the final run here, but that and I haven't started making the rat tail yet, which is a round piece. Well, there's the ring. It's good enough, but you can see the layers in it. But it was all part of the same thing. There was not copper added to copper to make it.
The punch style.
Oh yeah. About the end piece.
Or you could turn it into a
Yeah.
punch for the Bannerstone.
That end up there, Dave and I had talked about it earlier. If it does go bad, it would be a good piece probably to turn into a punch. And for punching a hole in the copper, like we're going to get into about the Bannerstone with the hole in it, or any of the implements you see over there on Doug's displays with holes in them were all punched, which is an interesting technique. Well, there I am, that shortened tang, instead of having a nice long rat tail tang, I'm going to end up with a shorter one, and I still have that bad flaw right at the shoulder of where the point opens up. Next one, we'll see the other side maybe. Well, there's some of the talk on the braiding and grinding with the sandstone. Important, important, important. If you want a nice quality looking piece when you get done. Next one. There it is. She's starting to round out, and I have crunched, pounded that crack together right in here. And I think we're going to make it. And you notice each time the copper looks different. When you anneal it, when you take it out and from annealing, you put it in water, and you don't. The only reason you're putting it in water is to cool it down so you can pick it up. It doesn't do anything to the. It's just the copper now is softer, and you can work it. And the more you, excuse me, pound it, the harder it gets. And then if you go pound it too far, it gets brittle and cracks. And unless you melt that copper, cracks never will go away. If you melt the copper, you can pour it back into a mold, and it'll be a solid piece of copper. But that's not done in North America. That's how you do it in the old world. So I was saying, notice how each one looks different. You take it out of the fire and you throw it in the water, depending on how high the temp or what the temperature was in the fire when you took it out, and as the water in your bucket warms up, so every time you do it, it's different. And that piece there probably was, I got it a lot hotter than this one. This was a warmer piece, probably out of the fire and into the fairly warm water. The next one was probably a lot hotter, but it went into that same warm water. And so it doesn't look as pretty. So that's it. And it's in the frame here. It really needs one more pounding to do the edges, to do the sharpening on it, but we left it. We still had 3 others we were working on. So, but that's, and I tried bending it, that tang where that bad flaw was, just down from the shoulder. It's pretty good and tight, and I think one more pounding on it would have us all You could kill anything you wanted with it.
Did you do all the pounding with that cylindrical
Yep,
rock?
yep. And on a piece of basalt, which I broke, so now, which was my daughter's from her rock garden, or her storage pile in my yard, so I figured I had some rights to it. And I cracked it, and she noticed. Anyhow,
Barry, how many hours did that take to make?
Buck can tell you, how long did this one take?
Well, if
How
you
many,
go-
well, those are the Neils.
Yeah, that's, what, 13?
Yeah, I think it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We don't count that one.
If you put the time together, about 4 hours. As long
Yeah,
as you have a
or-
hot fire going.
Or, see, it was hard to tell because we were doing 4 of them. And we were just going blurr, and then we were doing a lot of talking. And my son came over and got BSing, and you know, you can't, we lost our scientific edge there. Yeah, there was some beer.
When you hit your finger.
Oh, and then I hit my finger, and
Was this the first time you'd ever this before?
no. No, I've been doing this for 6, 8 years.
Okay.
Do you figure it's minimum wage?
Yeah, yeah.
Time.
Time? Time to quit?
No, but it is time to,
Okay. Are we done with our half hour?
yeah.
Okay. Do we have 5 minutes for questions?
We should probably do it at the end.
Okay.
Because the
All right.
sun's coming up.
Well, now we laid the groundwork a little bit to see how things were made. So Buck's going to carry it on with our great friend Joe Neubauer and what he found out, and we're going to look into punching holes a little bit, and
Okay.
David will.
I gotta get that mic down. Here.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Larry. I've been blessed with 2 best friends. I met Joe Neubauer in '98, and I was his scribe and chaperone and driver for 14 years. Documented a lot of his work, not all of it. And about 2002, at my mineral store on the North Shore, along with Joe Neubauer, here comes Larry Furo over to see Joe Neubauer's work, which we had on display at my store. And since then, Larry and I are best friends. So this is a joint effort of mutual love for history and especially for copper. I've done quite a bit of research for this to get the definition of the Bannerstone. In my research, and I could be wrong, but the only atlatl Bannerstone that's been found was in Kentucky during the Tennessee Reservoir work in 1930s. There has been no other documented Bannerstone with an atlatl in an archaeological setting. There have been mesas found throughout the Mississippian period, Hopewell period, maybe even earlier. What we're going to look at here now, the definition, we're going to stay with Bannerstone because next, please. George West in 1929 published the native copper Bannerstone that's curated at the Milwaukee Public Museum. He termed it Bannerstone. Everybody's been calling it that since. What it is, what it was used for, nobody even has a clue because there's only been one found. There have been some people who have said that this is a fake. They've analyzed it and said it very well could have been cast. It might have been a fake that somebody made. If you only have one in the world, they're suspect. But nevertheless, this sparks tremendous curiosity amongst the archaeologists and metallurgists and historians, and we're thankful for Robin, who went to the museum, documented. She's got wonderful photos of it, held it in her hand. It's just a wonderful thing. Thank you, Robin, for helping us. Next. How this all happened is Joe was a metal detector. He went all over the area. He concentrated on the Snake River, on the St. Croix River, and on the Kettle River of Pine County, Minnesota. We're going to show you exactly where that is, but he found this in a gravel pit in the 80s, and we have it. If any of you want to weigh, analyze, photograph it. Years later, when he saw the West publication, it tickled his imagination. Next, please. Look at the curve, and he found hundreds of copper artifacts, but never anything like this, and he never saw anything published like the one he found near the Kettle River. Look at the curves. When he saw the George West, and after he had accomplished the Neubauer process, which Larry is an expert in. He's a tremendous disciple of working this metal almost like magic. Larry is as good as Joe was when he passed away. Yes, you are. And this Bannerstone then is something that Joe Neubauer had to duplicate just to prove to himself how to do it, and especially how to get that hole through a matrix of copper. Next, please. Okay, here we are. Professor Rose gave excellent information this morning. I learned from him. This is the Neubauer Debbie professional site. It was published in 2000 in the Minnesota Archaeology by Steve Mulholland and Anthony Romano. This is a copper work site. If you want to see some of the actual artifacts from it, they were sold at the Neubauer auction a year ago. Doug Miller has 2 of them in here. The reason I'm talking about this is look at where this work site of copper, archaic copper, is. It's not anywhere close to the Keweenaw Peninsula. How did that happen? Next, please. Okay, the Neubauer site is on an old buffalo run. They've dated this to around 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. It's a multiple site. You can read about it in the 2000 journal. 150 pieces of copper on this. This is a tributary of the Snake River. It's right next to the Kettle River. Next, please. During the glacial Duluth Lake, 11,000 years ago, the Keweenaw was covered by ice. This is Pine County, Minnesota. 2 major outlets coming to the south, making the St. Croix River, rushing down into the Mississippi. Made the big gorges around Taylor's Falls, Stillwater, Minnesota. This is the Brule River, what remains of it now. But here we are down here. Next, please. This is the Neubauer site. This was a concentrated area that Joe Neubauer spent a lot of time at. Let's see. On the Kettle River, which is Kettle River, is basically this. In this area right here, these agate basin type copper points were found by Joe Neubauer. I inherited them from him. The interesting thing is, this is right next to my nursery and tree farm that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s helped put my kids through college. Joe was there finding copper. Okay, here is the Bannerstone, just a print out of that 29 magazine. I think it's the Wisconsin Journal, I'm not sure on that. Next, please. That piece that stimulated Joe's imagination, which you can look at and study and measure, weigh, whatever, handle if you wish, comes basically from the Kettle River. This whole area is completely open 2,000–3,000 years before the Keweenaw Peninsula. I leased out my land on the Kettle River to a uranium mining for drilling several decades ago. There's uranium all over western Carleton County. I got this book, and in it is documentation of a geologist in 1866 defining the outcroppings of copper veins on the Kettle River and also on the Snake River. I have personally seen the copper veins on the Snake River. The archaic Indians, or whoever it was, have dozens of archaic pits, just like here in the Keweenaw, all throughout that area that have been documented by archaeologists, especially out of UMD. There are pits all along northern Wisconsin and pits all the way down almost to Pine City, Minnesota. Joe vehemently believed that the first exposure to people using copper, native copper, as a tool was thousands of years before it started up in this area and in northern Wisconsin. The Bannerstone. How do you do that? Well, we're going to go into how this was formed. He made 3 of them. Let's take a look at how he did it. I documented each step. As I mentioned, I was his scribe for years. Next, please. A 10-year-old boy or girl can work the copper very easily to this point. These are orthorhombic polyhedron pieces. In my first publications, I called them cubes. They're not cubes. They're not rectangle. They are orthorhombic polyhedrons. Dr. Bon Cornelson is the one that helped us identify the shape. Here I make them into, good rectangles. But if you look at what Larry has done with his preforms and ingots, not one of them is the same. And you can never be sure how they're going to turn out because there's internal flaws of epidote, peridot, all the other mineralization, silver, arsenic. You can get to the final end and the thing falls apart on you because of a different mineral layer that precipitated the hot thermal water. Back to the Bannerstone. Joe he worked and worked on it, and he did what he called the split wing. You saw on purpose, Larry, in his presentation of the Neubauer process, we put that in on purpose. You saw the chiseling. You can chisel copper when it's soft with another piece of copper that's hardened. You can have copper chisel soft copper. You can chisel this preform into split wings. Or you can take the same preform and by pounding out this way, not touching the matrix in the middle, pounding out this way, you will form both this side and the ventral side, and you will make a pug or a dumbbell form, is what Joe called it. So this is where, more skill gets involved. The 10-year-old probably isn't doing this, although there might be some. But we're pretty sure by the time people were 15 or 16, and were able to deal with physical and mental strength, that this copper could be done. It is not brain science. It does take skill, and it takes somebody to help teach you, like Larry, being taught by Joe, and now Larry teaching any of you. how do you make this hole? That was the big experiment that Joe and I went into. Next period, next frame. Okay, here's a dumbbell form. Okay, remember now when I showed the pounding that this matrix we kept thick? These are already thinned out. This is thin. You got to keep this thick. Next, please. The split wing, the matrix in the middle is thick. This does not resemble the George West Bannerstone. This was a figmentation of Joe's imagination and how that copper came out. He liked it so well, he made 2 of these. Oh, I'm sorry. He liked it so well, he made 2 of these, and one of the dumbbell to replicate George West's. Please, next. Okay, on the whole, and we have samples here that you can look at. We have an actual, one of the actual punches that Joe used. I went to the auction and I was looking for that punch. Last night when we were preparing for the talk, Larry said, well, I've got the punch. Joe gave it to me. Jeez. So I've been looking all over for this punch, and here my best friend's had it in his pocket. You can take a look at that yourself. But what you start doing is with the matrix, either with the hardened antler right at the base of the head, or with a copper punch. We've got several examples, and Doug Miller has several examples. A hardened punch can go through this. It took 5 anneals from the dorsal, 5 from the ventral to make it, and then at the end he would ream it out by spinning it. Okay, so you can do it. It takes time, it takes many anneals. The hardest part that Joe had was to get the little punctate started, because it's got to be, pretty good indentation. And what he did there is he used a sharp piece of gabbro or basalt to get the dent, to get it going. Once you start getting the hard implement, the punch, either a deer antler, which we've got, and you can see what happens to it when you punch it through copper, or a hardened punch. Let's see. I lost my train of thought. But those 2 can be used to make that hole, and then at the end to ream it out. One of the interesting things is if that George West Bannerstone was in fact a counterweight on an atlatl, why in the world is the eye socket so small? An atlatl handle, and Doug Miller is a world champion in it, he can tell you more, but those sticks that I've seen are usually, at least a ½ inch in diameter, maybe even oval shape, but that George West eye is very small. So what kind of an atlatl handle was that on? Next, please. These are punches. This is a punch curated by Brian Revock in Woodruff, Wisconsin. It's 1.5 inches long. We're pretty sure that something like that would have been used to punch through copper matrices. Remember, when you go through the matrix, you can only go so far and it hardens up, and you have to anneal. So you have to be very careful. You can never over anneal it. So if you only drive it in 3 times and then anneal, no problem. If you drove it in 10, 20, 30 times, you're probably going to split the eye socket and the eye straps off. But several of these are on display. You can look at them in the Doug Miller collection, and also we have some exact examples that are archaic. Next, please. These are punches. This is the punch that my best friends kept in his pocket and never told me about until last night over a beer. What? But we've got it. It's here. And that was one of the punches used to put that eye socket through the Bannerstones that Joe made. By the way, I've only got 2 of the Bannerstones. The other one was inherited by his nephew, Al Bergstrom. Here's an example of a Joe Neubauer chisel used to chisel the split end. Instead of making a dumbbell, make the split wing with this. You can see chisels. There's a repo chisel out there, in fact, on the silent auction for sale today. But that's an example. You could probably see some of those in Doug Miller's too. Next, please. Okay, so thanks to Robin, we have great photos. It's curated. You can go study it. Only one that's been found in North America. It's got a very small eye socket. How in the world was that really attached as a counterweight on that lateral handling stick? This is Joe's dumbbell, replicating this one. And we have that here. You can handle it, photograph it, whatever you want to do with it. But that is here on display. Next, please. Go ahead. It should come in. Yeah. Okay. We do have, Larry and I have a CD with the publications I made in 2003 and 4, plus the 5-page publication that Joe Neubauer made but never was published. And also we have this PowerPoint on the CD. We got those for $10 if you want. We have a few of them. I think that's it, Larry. Okay. Larry, you want to? Any questions? Would be a good time for it, I guess.
I don't know what a ladle is or what it's used for.
Doug Miller, are you here?
Doug, you still here?
No, he must be out eating.
Oh, throwing stick.
He talked about it earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the throwing stick.
Okay.
Yeah, the throwing stick. And it's the handle, not the dart. Yes, ma'am.
We haven't seen it in North America, that Bannerstone form, anywhere else? Europe, South America, Central America?
Well, I don't know. I haven't looked at the research that far.
In lithic material.
We have an expert here, Don Spahn.
In stone banner, there are stone Bannerstones in Europe.
Ah,
But there are Bannerstones here by the thousands.
And they're rare.
Well, yeah, and they're in the thousands of dollars if you want to buy them. But that's a common, what they call a banner, what his dilemma was with the name of it. But there's plenty of them around here in stone. It's logical that would follow through into a metal.
Have any of the professional historians, archaeologists ever heard of another native copper Bannerstone? Yeah. Nobody else has either.
Doug?
Yeah.
No, Doug.
There's been, we all know we found it, but there was a copper at ladle weight. I wouldn't call it a Bannerstone, but it's called a bar weight. They make the one stone as well.
Yeah, we just saw that a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Was it professionally dug? Was it a professional excavation by archaeologists?
Larry's.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions or comments?
A comment. After I viewed it and handled it myself in the museum, and I've read about it often, and the best knowledge that I gained is here today about how it was reproduced. But in my opinion, it is one of two things. One, it's a possibility, as you mentioned, that it's a fake, a reproduction. Two, if it's authentic, then I think it is probably what everybody always called it, a copper bannerstone. But when I say bannerstone, I mean an actual bannerstone, not something used on an ladle. And I'm talking about the copper one, not stone bannerstones. In other words, it's probably on a long staff, carried in front of a chief or something like that. It certainly was never used as an axe.
That's our hypothesis too. We agree with you on that because of especially because of the small eye socket.
Exactly.
That's the key, we think. So then, Don, being an expert in that, copper being used by the Mississippians all the way up until 800 years ago at like Etowah and Cahokia, is this what you mean by a mace, bannerstone?
You see that as equivalent to a double-bladed axe.
But small.
Yes, but the hole's too small for handle to support an axe. And the bannerstone is too thin and flimsy to use as an axe. So that leads to it being used as a prestige object for a chief.
This is the actual sizes, you know. Okay. 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 And you can photograph these or handle them with, if you would like. So, okay. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.